You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 30th of January, 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Iraq could see the return of a controversial former prime minister unless the United States gets its way and his nomination is blocked. We'll speak to a Washington Post journalist on the ground in Baghdad. After that,
Mongolian tourism is really driven by nature, culture, and experiences.
That was Mongolia's former tourism minister who directed a campaign that has seen the Central Asian nation outperform much of the world in attracting tourism over the past year. After that, making a splash in Cape Town. Famous for its beaches, we look just a little further inland and find out how upgrades to the city's public pools are bringing communities together. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. A very happy Friday to all of our listeners around the world. Hope you have some great plans for the weekend coming up. But for today's show, we're going to start in Iraq, where the re-emergence of former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has caused something of a stir over this past week. Maliki has been nominated by the country's dominant political coalition to retake the prime ministership that he was given just a couple of years after the US-led invasion deposed Saddam Hussein. Except his resurgence comes without U.S. support. Donald Trump this week has warned Iraq that it would lose all American support and financing if Maliki does in fact become the next prime minister. Well, joining me now from Baghdad is Loveday Morris, a journalist from the Washington Post. Loveday, great to have you on the show. Let's start with Maliki's legacy from his first go-around in office. How did he do? What was he known for?
Right. Well, he actually served 2 terms as prime minister from 2006 to 2014. This was a period really marred by sectarianism, and Maliki was quite broadly sort of blamed for laying the ground for the rise of the Islamic State and the caliphate, so-called caliphate, later in 2014. There was a lot of disaffection among Iraq Sunnis. There were complaints of arbitrary arrests and harassment by security forces. We had these big protests in Anbar at the time. And that real sense of disaffection among the Sunni population, people really saw that as a reason for the rise of ISIS and also why things collapsed so quickly in the face of the militants. There were other reasons, of course, but that was seen as one of them. And Maliki was pretty broadly sort of blamed for that and seen as kind of sectarian policies were seen as one of the problems.
Which does then beg the question, Loveday, of why he is seeing a resurgence now. Where are his supporters? Is it among the public? Is it among certain groups within Iraq? Why is he suddenly back in the headlines as a possible next prime minister?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't actually call it so much of a resurgence. It seems to be kind of more of an accident that we've come to this situation where Maliki is back. It really came out of sort of wrangling with within the umbrella group that won the biggest amount of seats in November elections, the coordination framework. And Maliki and the incumbent Mohammed al-Sudani were both gunning for the top seat, and they were sent off by other members of the coalition who said, we can't decide. If you guys decide among yourselves, and we'll go with whatever you choose, not expecting them to choose one of them. But Sudani ended up backing Maliki and stepping aside for Maliki. Some people see that as a bit of a political play, actually, in that he stepped aside and backed Maliki, knowing that Maliki is such a deeply unpopular figure in some circles that there would be at some point some block to him coming to power. And then he, who is also very unpopular in other circles, would then be able to step in. So, I mean, some people think that that's what's happening here. And maybe there was an expectation that Maliki would be blocked sooner, but for whatever reason, his nomination has continued until we had this really public reaction from the Trump administration.
Well, exactly. And I wanted to get to that reaction, which comes into then that sort of internal political intrigue that you're describing there, the jockeying for position. Now the Trump administration has intervened. Tell us a little more. I mean, I think we can guess from the first terms of Maliki, but why has the Trump administration made such a big deal of this?
Well, yeah, obviously people in Washington have the experience of dealing with Maliki the first time around. There was, although the US sort of backed him for his second term in 2014, that everyone, all the powers were kind of rounding against Maliki to get him out of power because he was really clinging to his position back then in 2014. But yes, why is the Trump administration so opposed now? One, obviously, there's the bigger geopolitical situation and the US really moving against Iran and trying to isolate Iran. And Iraq is one of the places they're actively trying to do that. And a lot of US policy here is really focused on rolling back Iranian influence. I think one of the things that really worked against Maliki towards the end here was that our reporting is Maliki was given Iran's blessing at one point. So I think that didn't help, obviously, his position when it came to the US. And yeah, we saw this really first kind of quieter reaction. We had the call from Rubio to Sudani, voicing concerns about an Iran-influenced government. But yes, and then the much more public reaction from Trump. Yeah, US policy here is really about getting the Iran-backed militias disarmed. I suppose there were some questions about whether Maliki would do that, although, there's questions as to, whichever prime minister who comes in will be capable or willing to do that. But yeah, certainly we saw a very strong reaction in the end.
Well, and Maliki himself has, of course, rejected this U.S. interference as an attack on Iraq's sovereignty. But at the end of the day, it's not really up to him. And as you've alluded to, there are a lot of internal dynamics here. So put that together for us. How does this play out? I mean, will other Iraqi politicians potentially, take this as an opportunity then to not have Maliki become prime minister, which you suggest some didn't want all along? Or will the U.S. threats kind of, embolden them to defend Iraqi sovereignty and therefore put Maliki in as even if they don't want him there?
I think it's just Maliki himself looks like he's digging in. Obviously he's put out quite strong statements rejecting this interference. And politicians in his bloc have talked about being able to win Trump over. But while he hasn't publicly said anything about stepping aside and giving up the nomination, I think everyone knows that Iraq just cannot afford to go up against the Trump administration. I mean, everyone is terrified of U.S. sanctions on Iraq, on Iraqi figures, or financial sanctions. The U.S. totally controls Iraq's purse strings effectively because oil revenues go to the U.S. Federal Reserve. And so there's a real fear here that if they really went up against the Trump administration, there's the potential for the dollar flow to be cut off to Iraq. So just facing those kind of fears and pressures, it's really hard to see how Maliki's nomination can continue now. Yeah, the question is who will step in. Sudani, as I mentioned, he's also quite unpopular with other members of his own coalition who will now be discussing the path forward. Quite possible we'll have a consensus candidate of some kind, some figure who's a little bit more in the shadows, who they can come to an agreement on. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
Just finally, Loveday, there is a armada approaching, as Trump calls it, Iran, which is facing its own demands from the U.S. to negotiate on a nuclear deal, et cetera, et cetera. Is Iraq watching that closely as well, even if, as you say, they might not be supporting Maliki anymore, or that's inevitable? U.S. opposition to him, as you alluded to, has to do with his closeness to Iran as well.
The real thing, obviously there's a huge amount of nervousness here, just, from the proximity to Iran. And there's the fear of being sucked into any conflict. Iraq has since 2003 has been at the center of this struggle between Iran and the US for influence. And there's a fear that Iraq could be sucked in A large factor in that is obviously the Iranian-backed militias we have here. And even in the mosques here in Baghdad, some of the militias that are closest to Iran, like Kataib Hezbollah, are signing up fighters who plan to cross in the scenario that the regime is threatened in any way.
Loveday Morris, Washington Post journalist in Baghdad. Thank you very much for joining us. And now, here's Carlotta Ribello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Ukraine says it will halt long-range strikes on Russian energy facilities if Russia does the same. Recent strikes on Ukraine's power infrastructure have disrupted light, heating and water supplies, with temperatures plummeting and leaving the war-battered country facing a fresh humanitarian crisis. France's Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has forced his budget through Parliament without a vote for the third and final time. His opponents, including the hard-left and far-right parties, have vowed to file no-confidence motions against him in response. And Japanese low-cost carrier Peach Aviation is adding 6 special flights to its schedule. It is to coincide with the final tour stop of popular idol group Arashi in Sapporo from March 13th to 15th. The concerts fall close to national university entrance exams, with both fans and exam takers coming from across Japan, driving airfares and hotel prices in the city. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Now, tourism around the world has been on the rise in the past year, up about 5% in 2025, according to the UN figures. But with geopolitical conflicts and politics marring certain destinations, some countries are doing better than others. Mongolia was among the fastest growing tourism destinations last year, albeit from a low base. It's a country still being discovered, if you will. And earlier I spoke with Nomin Chinbat, Mongolia's former minister for culture, sport, tourism and youth. She led a campaign to help people discover Mongolia in the last few years, and I began by asking her how her country managed to buck the tourism trend.
Well, I think the recent surge in Mongolian tourism sector, as you just rightly mentioned, the UN tourism barometer also stated that Mongolia has really experienced a great development on it, and it's all because of the policy that we could uptake during our government when I was tourism minister and led by our Prime Minister Ayurden. It really kind of become down to three policies, mainly actually introducing our country to the world, promoting Mongolia globally through Go Mongolia branding, one. So really people got to know Mongolia. And the second one is visa-free or visa access easy policy. So there's more countries be able to visit Mongolia easily. And third one is really the connectivity, increasing more flights, more destinations, and all three of them really benefited our tourism sector quite nicely and allowing us to be able to have 16% increase since 2024 and then 44% increase post-COVID. So it is tremendous improvement for us.
It's interesting how you put those three together, Nomin. When you describe introducing Mongolia to the world, was one of the challenges perhaps that you needed the second two things that you mentioned first? You needed the easier visa access and you needed the improved connectivity before you could introduce Mongolia to the world.
Actually, if you look at it, pre-COVID numbers in 2018, we've done a global survey with Edelman from USA, and stated that 1 out of 10 people knew about Mongolia. So we really never had the number of tourists to come to Mongolia. So that was very important for us to be able to have the critical mass. The number we're talking about compared to other countries are not big. We're receiving about pre-COVID 500,000 tourists. Today we're receiving 850,000 tourists. So if you compare it with the larger countries, it is not the number that is going to be sustainable for tourism sector to be able to continue to be profitable in Mongolia. So we needed the critical mass to come to Mongolia. And also, we had to combine it along with easy access to Mongolia, meaning free visa, easy visa access, and then same goes with the connectivity.
And what is the view then of the tourism sector now? Have you reached that critical mass, or presumably the way you describe it there with, at that time, pre-pandemic, only 10% of people knowing about traveling to Mongolia? There's a lot of room to still go upward there.
Yeah, we have a lot of room to improve. We recently have done a strategical policy with Boston Consulting Group, and it stated that we will require to have 2 million tourists by 2030. That will really be able to promote, or they'll be able to allow Mongolian tourism sector to be on its own and be able to actually sustain itself. Obviously, we need to make sure that the number grows sustainably, so we be able to also grow our infrastructure together.
Well, and on that point, I was going to ask as well, because infrastructure is key. Connectivity, as you mentioned, is one side of this, but once people are in the country, then it's where the infrastructure matters. Does that have to come first? Or I guess it's a bit of a chicken and egg question that's always a challenge for a tourism ministry and a tourism sector. Have you built up the infrastructure enough to attract people, or do you need to attract the people first in order for building up infrastructure and hospitality to be viable?
So as we are experiencing about 15% to 16% growth, and within our policy that we created during our time in the government, is that if we continue to grow at this rate, it will be sustainable enough for private sector to be able to build the infrastructure along with the growth. So there is a critical infrastructure which government takes under, which is the connectivity, the local flights, local connectivity. But on the other side, the rooms, hotels, the restaurants, and that part, we want our private sector to be able to lead on, and the number of growth allows them to be able to sustainably grow at that rate. But on the other side, I'd like to emphasize on is that Mongolian tourism is really driven by nature, culture, and experiences, including, adventure tourism and so on. So it is really for people to be able to experience the countryside. That is the key part. Obviously, Ulaanbaatar city is like anywhere else. It's a metropolitan city. We have enough infrastructure. We have enough beds and rooms to be able to receive guests. But when it comes to the countryside, that's where we have to really put our efforts and develop the infrastructure. But on the other side, since they come for the nature tourism, Mongolia is a vast, empty country with no fences. 90% of the country is fenceless, and the land is owned by government. So wherever you go, you imagine your hotel, your location, and you are in a billion-star hotel. So it is important for us to be able to retain that for the tourists.
Just finally, Noman, how welcoming, how eager are people in Mongolia for this additional tourism? Because we have, of course, seen in some other countries some pushback in over-tourism. Obviously, Mongolia is not necessarily there yet, but it is another reason to keep up with things like infrastructure, keep the public on side.
Yeah, Mongolian people are in general very hospitable people by nature and by also our culture. And, it's a big country, 2 million square kilometer. It's one of the most sparsely populated country. And as you are aware that Mongolia is really dependent on extractive industry. And in order to actually develop and diversify our economy, tourism is one of the key sectors to diversify. And it actually benefits from herders to the hotel owners and the restaurants, taxi drivers. So it is one of the really beneficial industry. And so it is welcoming. However, as I earlier stated, we need to sustain the number that allows us to grow the tourism industry inclusively.
That was Noman Chinbat, Mongolia's former Minister for Culture, Sport, Tourism and Youth. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Finally, on today's show here at Monocle, we do love a story about swimming pools, lakeside bodies, and other locations to take a swim in the city. So much so that we do have an entire book about swimming that you can look up. And in our latest February issue of the magazine, out this week, we turned our attention to a wonderful story about the swimming scene in South Africa's Cape Town. I'm joined now by the writer of that story, Nick Dahl, Cape Town-based journalist and Monocle contributor. Nick, great to have you on the show.
Thanks very much, Chris. Good to be here.
Where do we find you currently in Cape Town?
I'm currently on a very pleasant wine farm with a great view of Table Mountain and wedged between an ice cream shop and a sort of lunch restaurant. So lots of people eating and having it. It's a beautiful day here. 30 degrees, no wind.
Don't make us too jealous over there, Nick. It's not quite the same here in London. But let's look at the swimming side of things. You've obviously visited a lot of swimming pools over the last summer as well for this story for Monocle. Just describe the culture of swimming for us, first of all, in Cape Town, how it's developed, because this has been a story linked also to the end of apartheid.
Yeah, so I mean, Cape Town's got great beaches. So great swimming there. But what's overlooked is that there's also a very big network of public swimming pools. Some of them, they've been for over 100 years. There have been public swimming pools. In the last 30 years, so they developed. They got a much wider footprint, like across the whole city. The places that were formerly reserved for black or colored people have got swimming pools, and then they sort of fell into disrepair a bit, some of them. And in the last year or two, the new mayor, the current mayor, not that new anymore, has really put a lot of money and effort into getting all the swimming pools up and running again, and also making them nice. So, and it's really visiting the pools. I'm quite a beach person myself. So it was interesting for me to visit the pools and see that they're all being used and they're all looking good.
They are looking good. I mean, the pictures for this magazine piece are beautiful as well, Nick. Tell us about some of the people you met, what you saw when you were visiting the swimming pools, how excited, I guess, people were to be able to use them.
Yeah, I mean, the very first pool we visited is probably the most famous pool in Cape Town, and it's got an absolutely spectacular location. It's a 50-meter pool. It's actually got salt water pumped directly from the ocean, and it's kind of wedged between Table Bay and Robben Island on the ocean side, and then directly underneath Signal Hill, which is kind of part of the Table Mountain massif. And I mean, that pool, just the excitement. You walk in there, it was like 4 or 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, the weekend supposedly winding down, and I walked in there and there was just this energy, like you could hear like everyone was sort of chanting. And I looked up and there was a very nervous teenager on the top of the high board, and he was clearly about to attempt his first jump, and everyone gathered at the pool was like cheering him on. In the end, he actually got too scared and a lifeguard came and walked him down. So but it was just like this sort of good, clean fun. It kind of really, it almost felt like time travel in a way.
Good, clean fun, a lot of community. I mean, is that where this story, I don't know, not to say ends, but is that kind of the focus of this story for you? Or is there also an effort by Cape Town to maybe add public pools to its tourism push in addition to beaches? That's what it's obviously already known for. But does this fit into a sort of push for tourism in Cape Town as well?
So some of it's definitely the main focus, I think. I mean, Cape Town is focusing on tourism, and they are upgrading beaches. And one of the pools we visited is at one of the main beaches in Cape Town, and both the pool and the beachfront are simultaneously being upgraded. That's Muizenberg. But I think, and I mean, that Sea Point pool that I described at the beginning is definitely a tourist attraction. I mean, it must be one of the most beautiful swimming pools. If you were going to do lengths early in the morning or something, it would be hard to beat. But a lot of the pools are in areas that tourists wouldn't really go to. So it's definitely a focus from the mayor saying tourism is very important, but the people who live in Cape Town are also important. And that hasn't always, not every mayor has kind of made that important. So he's really has focused on improving things for all the neighborhoods around the city, so not just tourists.
Really interesting, Nick. And then for you, just finally, I mean, you said that you're a beach person over there in Cape Town. Has this changed your mind? Are we going to be finding you at one of these beautiful pools anytime soon?
Yeah, there was the one that I really enjoyed was the Newland swimming pool. It's in a very sort of pleasant, genteel part of town. And it was kind of like, the kids often won't go to the park. But in the summer, the park's hot, and this place kind of felt like a park with a pool. So it had, a bit of everything. And I must add that the pricing is absolutely dirt cheap. I mean, even for us South Africans, it's laughable what you pay to get into them.
Nick Dahl, a journalist based in Cape Town, making us all jealous with the beautiful weather and swimming pools in his city. Monocle's February issue with this story is out on newsstands today. And that's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Angelica Jobson. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard. And our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.